she vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions. But when he found her again, it was in the most unexpected place, a quiet beachside cafe, far from the danger they both once knew. What happened to her? And would they finally escape the past, or would it catch up to them once more? Join us on a journey of love, secrets, and second chances. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when James got the call that would change his life forever. Lily, his girlfriend of 3 years, was gone. Just like that, without a trace. One moment, she had been sitting across from him in their favorite cafe, talking about their future plans, and the next, she was missing. The police were called, and a frantic search began. Friends and family rallied together, but no one had any answers. The authorities combed through her apartment, the places she frequented, even the city streets, but everything seemed to point to nothing. No broken windows, no signs of struggle, no messages, nothing to indicate where she had gone or why. James couldn't understand it. Lily wasn't the type to disappear without reason. She was vibrant, warm, and full of dreams. They had been planning to travel together, move in, maybe even get married one day. It didn't make sense. And that's what haunted James the most, the lack of answers. Days turned into weeks, and the police had no new information. Friends told him to move on, to let it go. But how could he? He had loved her. She was his world, and it wasn't in her nature to leave without so much as a goodbye. He started to notice subtle things that seemed out of place. How his friends' comforting words didn't help, the emptiness of her side of the bed, and the constant reminders of what was once. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was still out there, that something was wrong, that she hadn't just walked away from the life they had built. So, James made a vow. He would find her, no matter what it took. His search became all-consuming, and it was this unyielding determination that would eventually lead him to a small coastal town, to a discovery that would make everything seem to fall into place, or shatter it entirely. The next 12 months passed in a blur of hope, despair, and a growing sense of isolation. James traveled from city to city, knocking on doors, contacting anyone who might have seen Lily, and following the few leads that trickled in. Private investigators were hired, flyers were distributed, and social media campaigns were launched, all in an effort to bring her back. But time, as it often does, only worked to blur the edges of the memory. People stopped asking questions. Those who had been there to support him slowly withdrew, offering empty words of encouragement, but no real answers. James' friends started to get concerned. They'd watch him slowly retreat into himself, his face growing more hollow as the days passed. His hair became longer, and the dark circles under his eyes deepened. He wasn't the same person anymore. This search for Lily had become a shadow that overshadowed everything else. His job, his friends, his health. All of it fell by the wayside as he clung to the slim hope that he might one day find her. He even turned to psychics, searching for something, anything, that would give him a clue. But nothing came. The leads, one by one, fizzled out. The police told him that they had exhausted all options, that they had no new information to offer. A part of him knew that they were right, that this might just be one of those cases where the mystery remained unsolved forever. But another part of him refused to believe that she was gone without a reason. As the months wore on, James began to feel the weight of his search. His body grew tired, his spirit frayed. He stopped sleeping properly and began to lose his appetite. His friends stopped calling, his family grew distant, and the once supportive group of people who had been there for him now gave him the same advice. It's time to let go. But James couldn't. He couldn't let go of the woman he had loved so fiercely, of the woman who had disappeared without a trace. It was a late autumn day, one of those days where the sky is overcast and the cold air bites at the skin. James found himself driving aimlessly, searching for something he couldn't explain. It wasn't so much that he thought he'd find her on the other side of the country. It was more that he couldn't stop himself. It was the first time in months that he'd felt like leaving the city, like there was somewhere else he needed to be. So he found himself in a coastal town, far from everything he knew, far from his old life. He didn't know what he was looking for, but maybe it was time for a break, time to breathe, time to listen to the ocean's rhythmic song. The moment he stepped out of his car, a gust of salty air filled his lungs. The smell of the sea, fresh and raw, seemed to clear his mind. He took a deep breath and started walking aimlessly down the quiet streets. It was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and the pace of life seemed slower, more relaxed. The kind of place that felt like an escape from his worries. As he passed a small, inviting cafe near the beach, the warm light spilling out into the cold street, something strange tugged at him. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to go in. He pushed open the door and was greeted by the soothing scent of freshly brewed coffee. But it wasn't just the smell that caught his attention. It was the woman behind the counter. There, standing in front of him, was Lily. Or at least, it looked like Lily. She was dressed differently, her hair a little longer, and her face seemed a little more serene. But it was her. It had to be her. James stood frozen, staring at her, unable to believe his eyes. James blinked several times, hoping that the woman in front of him would disappear and the cafe would reveal its true nature. But she didn't vanish. The woman behind the counter was still there, pouring coffee into a cup with delicate, practiced motions. She didn't seem to notice him at first, and James could only stand still, his heart pounding in his chest. It was impossible. His mind raced with questions, each one more urgent than the last. How could this be? He took a tentative step forward, his voice catching in his throat. "Lily?" he asked, barely above a whisper. The woman's hand stilled. For a moment, she didn't move at all. James watched as she slowly turned toward him, her expression unreadable. Then, as recognition slowly dawned on her face, her eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her features. The once warm, familiar eyes of the woman he had loved were now guarded, cold even, as if the person he knew had been replaced by someone else entirely. For what felt like an eternity, neither of them said anything. It was as though the world outside the cafe had ceased to exist, and all that remained was this moment. A moment where reality had fractured into something strange and unexplainable. "James," she finally spoke, her voice hoarse and distant. "What are you doing here?" James took another step forward, trying to process the flood of emotions crashing over him. Shock, confusion, relief, anger. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but it never felt like this, never so surreal. His voice wavered with a mix of disbelief and desperation. I've been looking for you. For a year. Why didn't you tell me? What happened? Where did you go?" Lily's expression flickered briefly, but she quickly masked it with a calm, practiced smile. Her eyes, however, betrayed her. He could see the tension, the way she pulled away from him ever so slightly. She set down the coffee pot, wiped her hands on her apron, and motioned for him to follow her out of the cafe. Her gaze darted nervously around the room, as though she feared someone might overhear. James, too stunned to question her, followed her outside. The cool breeze of the beachside town wrapped around them, a stark contrast to the heavy silence between them. They stood by the wooden fence overlooking the ocean, the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore the only noise in the air. James' heart raced as he turned to her. "Lily, please. What's going on? Why are you here? Why didn't you contact me? We could have helped you." Lily's eyes lowered to the sand, and she seemed to struggle with her thoughts, as though trying to find the right words. Finally, she spoke, but her voice was distant, almost guarded. "I couldn't," she whispered. "It wasn't safe. For either of us." James frowned, his confusion deepening. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Lily hesitated, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was listening. "There are things you don't know, James. Dangerous things. I had to disappear to stay alive." The words hung in the air, heavy and cryptic. James could feel his pulse quicken as a sense of dread began to creep up on him. He had no idea what she was talking about, but it was clear that whatever it was, it had changed her, perhaps forever. "Lily, I need you to explain. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? We could have." "No," she interrupted sharply, her voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't risk it. I didn't know who to trust anymore." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a depth of emotion that was both familiar and foreign. "I thought I was doing the right thing. For both of us." James wanted to reach out, to pull her into his arms and hold her close. But something in her expression stopped him, a warning that she wasn't the same person he had known. It was as if the woman he had loved was hidden behind a veil of fear and secrecy. He could feel the distance between them grow, despite the closeness of their physical proximity. "I don't understand, Lily," James whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Why leave me in the dark? Lily's eyes softened, but only for a moment. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her secret had become too much to bear. Because I couldn't drag you into it. I didn't want you to get hurt, James. There are people, dangerous people, who would stop at nothing to get what they want from me. I had no choice but to disappear. The silence stretched between them, the weight of her words sinking in. James didn't know what to say, his mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what she was saying. Dangerous people? She had been hiding from someone. Who were they? Why hadn't she told him anything? His thoughts spiraled out of control as he searched for answers in Lily's unreadable expression. I'm so sorry, Lily whispered, her voice shaking. I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't risk anyone else getting involved. James stood there, speechless, his heart torn between anger, confusion, and a desperate desire to understand. The woman he had loved, the woman who had shared his life, had become a stranger, one who had lived in fear, a prisoner of her own circumstances. Lily, James said slowly, trying to wrap his head around the truth. What happened to you? What are you running from? For a moment, Lily didn't answer. Instead, she just stared at the ocean, her eyes filled with a sorrow that James couldn't fully comprehend. Then, finally, she turned to face him, her expression resolute. I'll tell you everything, she said quietly. But not here. Not now. It's too dangerous. The gravity of her words hit James like a punch to the gut. He knew that nothing was as it seemed, that the woman in front of him was hiding more than just the truth of her disappearance. And he also knew that he would do whatever it took to find out what it was. James couldn't help but feel a knot tightening in his chest as Lily's words echoed in his mind. Too dangerous. Those words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. He had spent an entire year searching for her, and now that he had finally found her, the mystery surrounding her disappearance had only deepened. What had happened to her? What kind of danger was she in? And why had she felt the need to hide in this small coastal town? The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the beach, and James felt the cool bite of the evening air on his skin. He shivered, not just from the temperature, but from the overwhelming uncertainty that now clouded his thoughts. He needed answers, but he could see in Lily's eyes that there were things she wasn't ready to say. I know you're scared, James said softly, his voice filled with a quiet urgency. But you don't have to do this alone. We can face whatever it is together. I'm here for you. You don't need to keep hiding. Lily's gaze softened for a moment, but then she looked away, her expression hardening once more. She crossed her arms over her chest, as if shielding herself from something more than just the evening chill. I wish it were that simple, James, she replied, her voice low. But there's more to this than you understand. I didn't just disappear, I ran. I didn't want to drag you into it, because I knew they would come after you too. And if they found you, if they knew you were involved in my life, they would use you against me. I couldn't risk that. James felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He had always thought that he could protect Lily, that they could face anything together. But now it seemed like the world had changed in ways he couldn't control. The weight of her fear was palpable, and for the first time, he understood the depth of her sacrifice. She had chosen to walk away, to disappear, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Who are these people? James asked, his voice thick with concern. What do they want from you? Lily hesitated, her eyes flicking to the ocean as if searching for the right words. When she spoke again, her voice trembled slightly, but there was an undeniable resolve behind it. They're part of something bigger, James, she said quietly. A criminal organization. I didn't know it when I first got involved, but I found out soon enough. It started out innocently enough, just some minor dealings, but then things escalated. They wanted more, and I became a target. I didn't realize the danger I was in until it was too late. I had no choice but to run, to disappear before they could get to me. James was speechless, his mind struggling to grasp the enormity of what Lily was saying. Criminal organization? She had been living in the shadows, trapped in a world he couldn't even begin to understand. How could he have known? How could anyone have? But why didn't you tell me? James asked, his voice thick with emotion. Why didn't you trust me enough to help you? Lily's face softened, a shadow of guilt crossing her features. I didn't want you to be a part of this, James. I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to you because of me. I thought I could protect you by staying away. But now I see how wrong I was. James reached out instinctively, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was tentative at first, but when she didn't pull away, he took it as a sign. Her hand was warm, but trembling, and it felt like a lifeline. They stood there, in silence, for a long moment, the sound of the waves crashing in the distance filling the space between them. "Lily, you don't have to protect me anymore," James said, his voice full of conviction. "We'll face this together. Whatever it is, whatever they're after, we'll figure it out. I'm not going to let you do this alone. You don't have to keep running." Lily met his gaze, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read his sincerity. There was a flicker of hope in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. "I don't know if it's safe, James. You don't understand what they're capable of. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Her voice broke slightly, and she took a step back, as though the weight of the situation was pushing her away. "I don't care what they want," James replied firmly. "I'm not going to lose you again, Lily. We'll figure this out, together." Lily's eyes welled with tears, and for a brief moment, James saw the vulnerability beneath her tough exterior. The woman he loved, the woman who had been running, was still the same, still capable of love, still capable of trust. And maybe, just maybe, that trust could be enough to break free from the shadows that had been chasing her for so long. After a long pause, Lily nodded, a small, hesitant smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Okay," she whispered. "But we have to be careful. They've been looking for me for a long time, James. If we're going to do this, we have to be smart." James nodded, determination flooding through him. "We'll figure it out. We'll do this right. You're not alone anymore." The wind picked up, the salty air brushing against their faces as they stood together on the edge of the world, staring out at the vast ocean. The danger wasn't over, and the road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, James felt like they had a chance. A chance to rewrite the story, to reclaim the future they had lost. And whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure. He would never stop fighting for Lily. Not now, not ever. The next few days were a blur of activity, as James and Lily tried to piece together a plan. The coastal town, with its sleepy charm and quiet streets, now felt like a fragile shell hiding a far more dangerous reality. Lily had made it clear that they couldn't afford to stay there for long. Every moment they spent lingering in the small cafe could be a moment that someone, somewhere, figured out where she was. The organization she had escaped from was far-reaching, its tendrils extending into places James could never have imagined. He couldn't fathom the depth of her involvement, but he knew one thing for sure. Whoever these people were, they had power, enough power to destroy lives, and Lily had been running from them for a year. James watched as Lily packed the few belongings she had left in her small apartment. She moved methodically, almost mechanically, as though the act of packing had become second nature. A part of him wanted to reach out, to pull her into his arms and assure her that everything would be okay. But she had made it clear that she couldn't afford that kind of comfort. Not yet. She was still too afraid, still too burdened by the weight of her past decisions. They had gone through the basic logistics. Her safe house was compromised, and there was no point in returning to the apartment she had lived in. The police had been looking for her, and there were too many eyes watching. Her old life was gone, buried under layers of lies, deception, and a constant need for survival. So they would have to move. James wasn't used to living like this. He had always been someone who thrived on stability, on knowing what came next, on having everything in order. But now, he was living moment to moment, making decisions on the fly, and trying to understand what it meant to be a part of this dangerous world. They sat at a small table in the cafe that had become their base of operations, a place where they could talk in relative privacy, away from the curious eyes of the town. Lily had gone over everything she knew about the organization, but it was clear that she didn't know much more than he did. There were too many unanswered questions, and too many unknowns. "I've been trying to figure out how to get out of this," Lily said, her voice low. "But the more I think about it, the more I realize it's not going to be easy. These people are everywhere. They've got connections with the police, with politicians, even with some of the biggest businesses. You have no idea how deep it goes, James." James took a deep breath, trying to absorb her words. He had known that her life before had been complicated, but this was something beyond what he had ever imagined. There was no simple way out, no easy solution. "So what do we do?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with worry. "How do we get away from them? How do we make sure they don't find us?" Lily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. "We need to disappear, James. For real this time. The only way we'll be safe is if we cut ties with everything. People, places, everything we know. No more staying in familiar spots. We'll need to leave the country, go somewhere no one can find us. But we can't do it alone. We'll need help." James nodded. He understood. The plan was simple, but it would require careful execution. They would have to go off the grid, change their identities, and vanish. It was the only way to escape the grasp of the organization that had haunted Lily for so long. "What kind of help do you need?" James asked. "I have a contact," Lily replied, her voice hesitant. "He's a hacker. He owes me a favor, but he's in deep with the wrong crowd. It's risky. If he knows what's really going on, he might refuse to help us. Or worse, he could try to turn us into the organization. But it's our best shot. He can get us new identities, fake passports, the whole deal." James looked at Lily, a mixture of concern and admiration in his eyes. She had been living in the shadows for so long, and yet she was still willing to take these risks for the sake of her freedom and for his. "I trust you," he said, his voice firm. "Let's do it. We'll find him, and we'll make sure we get out of here. Together." Lily looked at him, her expression softening, but her eyes still held a trace of the fear that had been with her for so long. "I never wanted to drag you into this, James. But now that you're here, I'm not sure I could do this without you. I need you more than I've ever needed anyone." The weight of her words hung in the air. They were no longer just two people caught in a dangerous game. They were partners now, bound by a shared desire to escape from the darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. The road ahead was uncertain, and the danger was real, but they had each other. And that was something James could hold on to, something to fight for. The journey to meet Lily's contact was tense. James and Lily had packed everything they could carry into the back of a nondescript car, leaving the coastal town behind under the cover of night. The car rumbled over winding roads, and the faint glow of city lights disappeared behind them as they drove deeper into unfamiliar territory. They were leaving the safety of the town, the place where Lily had built her life, to step into a new world, one where the dangers were unknown and the rules were far from clear. The drive was long, and Lily remained quiet for most of it, her face drawn in concentration. James didn't press her for conversation. He knew this was hard for her. She had spent the last year running, constantly looking over her shoulder, never able to rest. Now, it was his turn to take the lead, to ensure that they both made it through this alive. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her, living in fear every day, unsure of who to trust. As they drove through a small, nondescript town in the middle of nowhere, Lily finally broke the silence. "He's not far now," she said, her voice tight with tension. "I don't know if I can trust him anymore, James. He's got his own skeletons, and I'm not sure where his loyalties lie. But right now, he's the only person who can help us." James nodded, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He was used to trusting his instincts, and right now, his instincts were telling him that this contact was their only chance. The hacker could either make or break their escape, and there was no turning back now. They arrived at a rundown building on the outskirts of town. The place looked abandoned, the windows covered with grime and dust, but Lily knew exactly where to go. She gave James a brief nod, and he followed her as they approached the door. "I just want you to be prepared," Lily warned as they reached the entrance. "He might not help us. He might even turn us in. But we have no other choice." James gave her a reassuring smile, even though the nerves in his stomach were tightening. "We'll be fine," he said, his voice steady. "We've made it this far. We'll make it through whatever comes next." Lily hesitated for a moment before she pushed the door open, stepping into the darkness beyond. James followed, his heart racing, unsure of what awaited them in this new, dangerous world they had just entered. The journey was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The dimly lit room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and old coffee, the kind of place that spoke of secrets hidden in the shadows. The walls were adorned with peeling wallpaper, and a faint hum from an old refrigerator in the corner added to the eerie silence. James felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise as they stepped inside, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Lily led the way, her steps quick and confident as if she had done this 1,000 times before. James followed closely behind, his senses on high alert. They didn't stop until they reached the farthest corner of the room, where a man sat hunched over a laptop, the faint glow of the screen casting sharp shadows on his face. He looked up as they approached, his eyes narrowing for just a moment before his lips curled into a small, almost mocking smile. "Lily," the man said in a low voice, his tone neutral but with a hint of suspicion. "It's been a long time." Lily didn't flinch. She stood tall, her posture resolute, but James could see the tension in her shoulders. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment that could determine their fate. "We need your help," Lily said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of urgency. "We need new identities, passports, something to get us out of the country." The man raised an eyebrow, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "You know the price, right?" Lily hesitated for a brief moment, and James noticed the flicker of doubt in her eyes. This man wasn't just any hacker. He was someone who dealt in information and secrets, someone whose loyalty was always in question. But she had no choice now. They had to trust him. "We're not here to play games," Lily said firmly. "We don't have time for bargaining." The man leaned back in his chair, eyeing them both carefully. "You always were a stubborn one, Lily. Fine, I'll help you. But it won't be cheap, and it won't be easy. You're going to have to disappear completely. And trust me when I say that there are no guarantees." James exchanged a glance with Lily, who nodded, her jaw set. She knew this was their only option. "We understand," James said, his voice firm. "We're ready to do whatever it takes." The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. But first, I need something from you. Something that will make it worth my while. You're not the only ones trying to disappear, and I've been tracking the organization you've been running from. If you want my help, you'll have to give me something they can't ignore. Something that will make them nervous enough to stop looking for you." Lily's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she didn't back down. "What do you want?" The man leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I want information. The kind of information that can destroy them. I want to know who's really behind the organization, who's pulling the strings. Once I have that, I can guarantee your safety." James could see the dilemma on Lily's face. She had already sacrificed so much to protect others, and now, the stakes were even higher. Giving this man the information he wanted meant exposing even more of her past, more of the darkness that had been following her for so long. "I don't know if I can trust you with that," Lily replied quietly. "That's too dangerous. If the wrong person gets their hands on that information, I can make sure it stays out of the wrong hands." The man interrupted. "You've got my word. But if you don't trust me enough to make this trade, then I can't help you. And I'm not sure how long either of us will survive without the right help." Lily's expression hardened, and for a moment, the weight of her decision was almost too much to bear. But then, she exhaled slowly, her resolve clear. "All right," she said, her voice low but steady. "I'll do it. I'll give you what you want. But you need to promise me that you'll help us get out of this. You have to make sure they can't find us." The man leaned back, satisfaction flickering in his eyes. "Deal." James felt a chill crawl down his spine. They were crossing a line now, one they couldn't come back from. But there was no turning back. They had to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. Lily turned to James, her expression softening for the briefest of moments. She seemed to be weighing the decision in her mind, wondering, perhaps, if this was the right thing to do. But when she looked at him, her eyes held something stronger than doubt. It was determination. She wasn't going to let her past define her anymore. Not if it meant protecting the future they could still have. As the man began typing on his laptop, gathering the information they would need to make their escape, James couldn't help but feel the weight of the choice they had just made. They were no longer just running from the past. They were now actively fighting for their future. The next few hours were a blur. The hacker, who introduced himself simply as Rico, worked at lightning speed, moving through various screens, his fingers flying over the keyboard. He barely spoke, except when he needed to clarify something, his eyes never leaving the glowing monitor. James and Lily watched in silence, the tension palpable. Each keystroke felt like a countdown, a step closer to either freedom or disaster. James sat in a hard, plastic chair, his thoughts racing as he glanced at Lily. She sat across from him, her eyes fixed on the hacker, her face a mask of composure. But he could see the anxiety simmering just below the surface. They were so close, yet the feeling of imminent danger lingered like a storm cloud overhead. "What's taking so long?" James finally asked, breaking the silence. He could feel his patience thinning, the uncertainty gnawing at him. The sooner they could leave, the better. Rico didn't look up from his screen. I'm not working with a deadline here. The process is delicate. I'm making sure that everything checks out before I hand over your new identities. One slip up, and we could all be dead before morning. Lily's jaw tightened at the mention of death, but she didn't flinch. She had lived with that reality for so long that it no longer held the same power over her. But James wasn't used to living with such constant fear, and the longer they stayed in this small, grimy room, the more the weight of it all seemed to press down on him. Do you think this will really work? James asked, unable to keep the doubt from his voice. Lily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and regret. It has to. It's the only way. I don't know what else to do. Before James could respond, Rico leaned back in his chair and finally turned to them. All right, your new identities are set. I've got everything ready. Passports, travel documents, the works. I've also got some routes for you to follow. But remember, if anyone finds out what you're really running from, you're as good as dead. The moment you leave, the clock is ticking. You'll need to be careful, and you'll need to be fast. Lily stood up, her expression unreadable as she walked over to the table where the documents were laid out. She glanced at them for only a moment before nodding. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. You've just saved our lives. Rico didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning the room as if he were waiting for something else to happen. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and grave. I didn't do this because I like you, Lily. I did it because I'm getting something I need. But don't forget, this isn't over. They'll come after you, and they won't stop. You can run, but you'll never be safe. Remember that. With that, he stood up and turned his back on them, walking toward a door that led into the back of the building. Lily and James stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Let's go, Lily said softly, her resolve hardening. We've got a new life to start, James. Let's make sure we don't waste it. James nodded, though the fear that had been building in his chest was still there, gnawing at him. They had what they needed, but the hardest part was still ahead, the part where they had to run, never knowing if they would be caught or if they could outrun the past that chased them. But there was one thing that was certain. They would face it together. And that, for now, was enough. The next morning, the sun was barely rising, casting long shadows across the empty streets of the town. James and Lily had already packed what little they could carry, slipping away from the cafe in the quiet hours before the world woke up. Every movement felt like a deliberate step in a race against time. The urgency of their situation pressed down on them like a weight they couldn't escape. They had no more time to waste. They had to leave before anyone realized they were gone. Lily, now armed with the new identity documents that Rico had provided, was a different person. The fresh passport with a new name was her shield, a symbol of her attempt to leave behind everything she had once known. Her old self, Lily Walker, was dead now, buried under layers of lies and deception. Now, she was someone else, someone who could escape the past and start anew. James glanced at her as they walked down the narrow street. Despite the tension in her shoulders, there was a certain determination in her step. She wasn't the same woman he had met all those weeks ago. In a sense, she had grown stronger, more resolute, and yet, there was still that underlying fear in her eyes. The fear of being found, of being hunted again. They reached the outskirts of the town, where a car waited in the shadows. It was an unassuming, nondescript vehicle, the kind that blended in with everything around it. The last thing they needed was attention. James opened the door, and Lily slid into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she fastened her seatbelt. The car's engine hummed to life, and they pulled away from the quiet streets, heading toward the unknown. The road stretched out before them, endless and open, yet James couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. How long do you think we can keep running? James asked, his voice low. We've got new identities, but it won't take long for someone to realize we're not who we say we are. Lily's eyes flickered toward him. We can keep running for as long as we need to. I've been doing it for a year now, and I'll keep going if it means I can keep you safe. The words hit James harder than he expected. He had seen the toll this life had taken on her, how it had chipped away at her sense of security, her trust in the world. She had been living in constant fear for so long, always looking over her shoulder, never allowing herself to rest. And now, here they were, running again. with no guarantee that they'd ever be truly free. But what other choice did they have? It was either run or let the past consume them. I don't want to keep running forever, James said, his voice steady. But if it means I have to do this with you, then I'll run as long as it takes. Lily smiled softly at him, the first real smile she had given him in what felt like ages. It was a small thing, but it made all the difference. For a moment, there was no danger, no past, no organization chasing them. Just the two of them, on the road together, facing whatever came next. They drove for hours, the landscape shifting from the coastal beauty they had left behind to the barren stretches of desert that seemed to go on forever. Lily's eyes were focused on the road ahead, but James could see the occasional flicker of doubt in her gaze, as though she were constantly searching for danger, for signs that someone was following them. I'm going to take you somewhere safe, Lily said suddenly, breaking the silence. There's a place on the other side of the border. It's a little town. They don't know me there, and it's remote enough that we'll be able to lay low for a while. But we'll have to move quickly. I don't think we can afford to stay in one place for too long. James nodded, though a part of him felt uneasy. They couldn't keep moving forever. But for now, they had no choice. He just had to keep his focus on the present, one step at a time. The small border town was everything they had hoped for. Quiet, almost forgotten by the world. It was a place where strangers could slip in unnoticed and disappear without a trace. The air was dry and dusty, the streets lined with small shops and homes that looked as though they had been standing for decades. It was the kind of town where time seemed to move slowly, as if the hustle and bustle of the outside world couldn't reach it. Lily had been here once before, and she knew exactly where to go. They rented a small, nondescript apartment on the outskirts of town, the kind that wouldn't raise any suspicion. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them the space they needed to breathe, to rest, to plan their next move. For the first time in a long while, Lily felt a sense of peace settle over her. They were safe, at least for now. There were no immediate threats, no shadowy figures lurking at every corner. The town was too small, too isolated for anyone to notice two strangers slipping through its streets. And in this quiet corner of the world, they could pretend to be normal for a while. But even in this place of relative safety, the past still haunted them. It lingered in the back of their minds, a constant reminder of the danger that still loomed. James could see it in Lily's eyes whenever she looked at him. She couldn't fully relax. She couldn't forget. We've got a few days, maybe a week, before they figure out where we are, Lily said, her voice low as she sat beside him on the couch. But after that, we'll need to move again. This is just a temporary solution. James nodded, understanding the urgency in her words. They had to keep moving, had to stay one step ahead of the organization that was still hunting them. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something other than fear, hope. It was faint, but it was there. They had made it this far, and maybe, just maybe, they could build a life together away from all the darkness that had defined their existence for so long. Maybe we can start over here, James said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. Maybe we can build something that's just ours. A life that's different from everything we've known. Lily looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as though she were trying to read his thoughts. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, finally, she gave a soft, shaky laugh, the kind of laugh that held both sadness and hope in equal measure. It sounds like a dream, doesn't it? She whispered. But maybe it's a dream worth fighting for. James smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that they could have something more than fear, that they could have a future that wasn't defined by their past mistakes or the dark forces that had chased them from place to place. Maybe they could have a life of their own, far away from the shadows. Maybe they could finally find the freedom they had been fighting for all this time. For the first time, James felt the warmth of hope burning brightly inside him. And for the first time, he believed it was possible. For the next few days, they settled into their new routine. They kept to themselves, blending into the quiet town like two ordinary people. They made small talk with the locals, never giving too much away, and spent their days exploring the narrow, sun-drenched streets. The apartment, though small, became a haven, a place where they could rest without constantly looking over their shoulders. But Lily could never fully relax. Her past lingered like a ghost that refused to leave. Every sound in the night, every shadow that flickered past the window, sent a jolt of fear through her. Her senses were always on high alert. James noticed it too, how she would freeze when the phone rang or when a car passed by too slowly. He knew that the organization they had fled from wasn't the type to forget its enemies. They would find them sooner or later. One afternoon, while they were sitting at a small cafe in the town square, Lily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She stiffened, her fingers brushing over it for a moment before she pulled it out. The name on the screen was unfamiliar, just a series of numbers. "Who is it?" James asked, his voice soft. Lily didn't answer right away. She stared at the screen, her face pale. Then, slowly, she put the phone back in her pocket without saying a word. James could see the tension in her body, her jaw clenched, and her eyes distant. "Who was it, Lily?" "It doesn't matter," she said quickly, her voice strained. "Just someone trying to track me. It's not important." James didn't buy it. He could see the lie in her eyes, the way her hands were trembling just slightly. He knew something was off. "You're lying," he said, his voice firm. "Lily, what's going on? You've been waiting for this, haven't you? You knew this would happen." Lily finally met his gaze, her face softening. "I've been running for so long, James. It's hard to explain, but I've always known they would find me eventually. It's just a matter of time." James took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "We'll deal with it together. You don't have to carry this burden alone." For a moment, Lily let herself lean into his touch, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his support. But then she pulled away, her eyes steely once more. "We don't have time for this. We need to be ready. If they know where I am, if they know where we are, we have to leave. Now." James's heart sank as he realized the truth in her words. Their peace was fleeting, a brief respite before the storm. The organization wouldn't give up. They never did. That night, James and Lily packed their things in silence. They didn't speak, but the weight of their situation hung heavy in the air. The soft rustling of clothes, the quiet zip of bags being closed. Everything seemed muted, as though the world outside had ceased to exist. It was as if the moment of calm they had enjoyed was nothing more than an illusion, and now, reality was crashing back in. Lily had already arranged for a car to take them across the border to a neighboring country. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the best they could do given the circumstances. The phone call had made it clear that they couldn't stay any longer. The organization was closer than they had thought, and every minute they wasted could be their last. James stood by the window, looking out into the darkened street. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched. He knew the risks, they both did. But he wasn't ready to lose Lily. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. "Are you sure about this?" James asked quietly, turning to her. "Leaving again, running away?" Lily looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't have a choice. I can't stay here. If they find us, it's over. They'll take everything from us. Everything we've fought for." Her voice was steady, but James could hear the edge of exhaustion, the toll this constant fight was taking on her. She had been running for so long, and now, when they were so close to freedom, it felt like they were being dragged back into the darkness once again. "I won't let that happen," James said, his voice resolute. "We'll fight. We'll keep running. But we're not going to let them destroy us. We have each other. And that's all that matters now." Lily's lips curled into a small smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "I don't deserve you, James. I've dragged you into this mess. You should be free. You should have a normal life." James shook his head, stepping closer to her. "Normal life? You think I'd want that without you? You're all I've got now, and I'm not going to walk away from you." There was a long silence between them as they stood facing each other, the weight of the world pressing in on them. In that moment, everything else faded away. The threat, the fear, the uncertainty. There was only the two of them, standing side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The sound of a car pulling up outside broke the moment, and they both turned toward the window. A single vehicle waited by the curb, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. It was time to go. Lily grabbed her bag and gave James one last, lingering look. "Stay close to me. Don't let go." "I won't," he said firmly, his voice low but filled with promise. They stepped out into the night, the world around them still and quiet, as though it were holding its breath. Every step they took was one closer to freedom or one closer to danger. There was no way of knowing which. But as they got into the car and began driving away, their future was uncertain. They couldn't outrun their past forever, but they would keep running. Because the only thing more dangerous than facing their enemies was giving up now. And they were not ready to surrender. Not now, not ever. The drive was long, the engine humming in the background as the miles stretched out ahead of them. The town they had left behind seemed like a distant memory, a place where they had shared brief moments of peace, only to be torn apart by the past they couldn't outrun. Now, as the car wound its way through the darkness, Lily and James both sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Lily's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, regret, and a tiny, flickering flame of hope. They were heading toward a new border, a new life. But the weight of the past still clung to her. She couldn't forget what she had done to James, dragging him into this dangerous world. And yet, he had never once blamed her. Instead, he had fought alongside her, believing in a future where they could find peace. He had given up his own normal life to be with her, and that sacrifice was something Lily knew she would never be able to repay. But as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, she saw something in James's eyes, a quiet strength, a resilience that had become a part of both of them. They had made it this far. They had survived the worst, and maybe, just maybe, they could build a future together, far from the shadows that had once controlled their lives. "I've been thinking," James said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Once we get across the border, I know a place, a small town by the lake. It's peaceful. People don't ask too many questions there. We can settle down, start fresh. We can put all of this behind us." Lily turned her gaze to him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "That sounds too good to be true. Are you sure you want that? A quiet life? After everything we've been through?" James chuckled softly, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "You know what? I don't care if it sounds too good to be true. I want that with you. A life where we can be normal, where we can just live together." Lily's heart swelled at his words. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, the kind of life she had once thought was impossible. A life where she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, a life where she wasn't defined by the shadows of the past. "We'll make it happen," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "I don't know how, but we will. We'll find our place." James smiled, a quiet sense of contentment settling over him. It was a fragile hope, one that could easily be shattered by the darkness they were still running from. But for the first time, that hope felt real, like it could actually become something tangible. They didn't have to be victims of their past. They didn't have to be haunted by it forever. They could choose to fight for their future. When they finally crossed the border, everything felt different. The air was lighter, as though they were stepping into a new world, a place where they could start over. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever would be, but it was theirs. And that was all that mattered. James and Lily arrived at the lakeside town, a quiet place tucked away from the chaos of the outside world. The streets were lined with old trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The lake itself shimmered in the morning light, the calm water reflecting the clear blue sky above. It was beautiful in a way that made Lily's heart ache. She hadn't seen beauty like this in so long. They found a small cottage at the edge of the town, nestled in a grove of trees. It was modest, but cozy, with a small garden out front and a wraparound porch that overlooked the lake. It was the kind of place people came to escape the world, to find peace. And that's exactly what they needed. For the first time, Lily felt like she could breathe. She could live here, free from the constant fear of being hunted. The weight of the past didn't feel so heavy here. She had James by her side, and together, they had built something new. Over the next few weeks, they settled into their new life. They met the locals, who welcomed them with open arms, and for the first time in years, Lily allowed herself to believe that she could be happy. The nightmares of the past didn't go away overnight, but with each passing day, the light of their future grew brighter. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear in the sky, James and Lily sat on the porch, holding hands. The air was warm, the sounds of the lake lapping gently at the shore. It was peaceful, perfect even. "I think we finally made it," Lily said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "I think we're really free." James squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting the same quiet joy. "Yeah, we made it. And we'll keep going forward, together. No more running. No more fear. Just us." Lily leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't thought was possible. She had spent so many years running, hiding, surviving. But now, she could finally live. She had found her home in James, and together, they would build a future that no one could take away from them. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream of a life without fear, a life where she and James could just be. And in that moment, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because they had something worth fighting for now. Something that could never be taken from them. They had each other. And that was all they needed. The years passed, and the quiet life they had always dreamed of slowly became a reality. James and Lily built a life filled with love, laughter, and hope. The shadows of their past faded with time, replaced by a new sense of belonging. They never forgot the struggles that had brought them here, but they no longer defined them. They were free. They had found peace. And as they watched the sunset over the lake one last time, they knew that no matter what tomorrow held, they would face it together. The journey had been long, and the road had been hard, but they had made it through. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey with James and Lily. We hope you enjoyed the story and felt the emotions and challenges they faced as they fought for their freedom and future. It's been an unforgettable adventure, and your support means the world to us. If you love this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And for more heartwarming, thrilling tales like this one, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Your subscription helps us bring you more of the stories you love, and we can't wait to share even more with you. Stay tuned for more adventures, and once again, thank you for being part of our storytelling family.